we interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a Channel 3 special report.
Tonight at 11, Gary Hinge goes missing in the Nevada wilderness. Hear the emotional plea from a sister desperate for answers, a roommate's frustration, and from footage, Gary himself. And more disturbing still, after a small documentary makes controversial claims against the accepted narrative and the details of the case produced by police investigation to a mass tragedy in a small Arizona town, which the locals affectionately call the Savagelands. Is there more to these two cases than the public might suspect?
Barry, why?
What?
Just
What
why?
now? I thought that was pretty good. Ace is my way to go. Gold star.
Thanks. I really tried. I was really trying to channel that inner news.
Dear God, the movies, Barry, the movies. Just why? Why? What could I possibly have done to you?
Oh, right. You're fit to complain. Oh, well, I'm just trying to broaden your horizon. The usual. For cats.
I gotta say, right? I didn't really think they were all that bad. I don't know what he's complaining about.
No one ever does, mate. Don't pay him any mind.
Right
I
here.
thought they were decent. But why don't you tell me what's got you on a bunch this time?
You are aware that I am right here, aren't you? Are you mentally deficient?
Boy,
These were
rack
not
off.
good movies. How can you claim otherwise?
Rack off. Do you even remember the last movie we watched? Before we were through, you were laid out on the floor clutching the bottle. Thought you might have been dead.
It was the only thing that kept me going. It gave me the willpower to continue.
Wait, did something happen? What did I miss?
Oh, heaps of fun. Man fell off a couch showing the ending of Horror in the High Desert. He refused to get up till it was over.
Now that just isn't fair. I wasn't about to turn my back on the screen. Something was going to happen. I was waiting for something to happen, and I was wrong.
What happened?
Nothing happened, and it continued for what I fear might have been a lifetime.
And so my question still stands. You even remember the ending to the movie?
What a ridiculous question. How absurd. Of course I remember the ending. I remember that nothing happened.
Well, he's not wrong. So he couldn't have been too drunk.
Oh, he was absolutely pissed, mate.
I resemble
like he
that
could have been
remark,
hammered.
and I'll have you
What did I
know,
miss?
it was the tequila.
What? Come on, guys. Without me?
Honestly, kind of feels like a crutch at this point. Emotional support.
It provides the fortitude to steel me for the dark, harrowing evening ahead of me.
As you will, mate. You have it your way, but you're gonna let it go. Least this time, I thought you were really enjoying that first one. You said Savageland was really interesting.
I did find Savageland to be a bit more palatable, and
You looked into it.
as a reward, it set my expectations rather high. I thought the night would be at least acceptable. That was until you turned on Horror in the High Desert, and my hopes were dashed and willpower tested.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that. I watched Horror in the High Desert first. Probably the better watch order.
If only to prevent my catatonic despair and eventual
Well,
self-destruction.
okay then. Let's be on with it. Let's talk about these things.
Before we do, I want to know how you decided on these two movies.
Well, JD,
I can see that they're similar in style, but really, these two.
well, it's a funny story. I wanted something for... The last movie that we watched was The Taking of Deborah Logan.
All my little puzzles, I do everything that I have read will help to stave off the progression of this disease.
And I recommend it. Go watch it.
Don't you dare
You shut
lie
your
to me.
face. I don't want to hear it. And I thought I wanted something that explores a more documentary style horror of the recovered footage genre. It seemed like it would go well with my idea that you don't need a high budget to create good horror movies, or that a good horror movie especially of the found footage variety, can be made with minimal production budget.
Horror in the High Desert stretched that idea past the breaking point.
Come off that. It was a fine movie. Maybe it looked a little cheap, but I'll still stand by it. It was enjoyable.
You told me it was supposed to be a horror movie. It wasn't even scary.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
I'm not sure. I'm at my brother's house. Just a minute. Let me see.
Not once did I find any of it frightening, horrifying, anything.
Were they even supposed to be scary?
Look, just because a movie isn't scary, that doesn't mean anything. I think they have their moments of horror, but I always contested that they need to be anything more than entertaining. You know, they just need to be fun, enjoyable.
So no, they weren't scary.
What do you know? You just seem to have as high a tolerance for being scared as you do the bottle.
Well, I don't know if it's horror, but for me, it's the style of the films. I don't mind the movies, but
Gary was 2 days late. That's not Gary.
You know, the style, it's done almost entirely in interview.
You know, he came here with the wrong idea. Everybody saw where it was going.
Just people talking to the camera. It doesn't feel like a real movie.
Perhaps it's the lack of a conventional narrative. Or maybe it's because all the shots are just one person. None of the cast interacts in any way. Perhaps that's why it might feel disconnected or disjointed, without the characters interacting, except when they might mention each other in the past tense.
Sure, I called Simon, who's Gary's roommate.
It's rather limiting. It feels almost isolated.
Check the dates on those two movies. Funny thing is, one of them was made during that whole fiasco.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for a Channel 3 special report.
The other one was made a good deal earlier. It can feel just a bit jarring seeing a movie where none of the characters talk to each other. That kind of thing. I find it neat, maybe a little charming in its own quirky way. Feels kind of experimental. I like it, but I can see why someone wouldn't. Both movies, Savagelands and Horror in the High Desert, are done almost completely in this interview style you recognize from a documentary.
And that was the level of analysis in the courtroom. A one-man serial killer army.
You might find it interesting. I find it detrimental. There is hardly a story to speak of. Everything is simply the relating of past events.
The TV stations, the news had stopped reporting on it.
And then the phone call came. They'd found Gary's truck.
As such, we, the audience, are removed from anything of substance. There's not even an investigation to keep you interested.
The coroner said on the stand, how do you run DNA tests on 20 square blocks of bloody sand?
That's already been done, and the facts of the investigation are simply being relayed to us.
I wouldn't even say that the movies are bad. I think I enjoyed Savageland. I agree with Barry. It was interesting. I at least enjoyed it more than Horror in the High Desert, but it's just such a strange way to make a movie, isn't it?
I was hired by Beverly shortly after Gary's truck was found.
Yeah, like I said, I get it. You just gotta get past that. I understand that it's not going to be everyone's preferred method of narrative, the way you tell a story. If you don't like the interview style, that's fine. And if you don't, these two films, they're not going to be for you. Hard stop. Do not watch. Do not go any further. The interviews, all the movie. They are crucial. They are the story. Sure, there's some shots outside.
It's very beautiful, but it's also quite dangerous and very unforgiving.
Where subjects walking about, maybe interacting with the environment. Otherwise, the subjects are in rooms talking to the camera.
During the first trial, I knew that Salazar had been interviewed on camera. Only once.
Yes, well, perhaps I'm being unfair. These don't qualify as movies.
Don't think they need your permission, mate. You don't get a say in that.
I understand what he's saying. There's not a story. Because, they're fake documentaries, made up accounts of things that didn't happen.
They're representing events as if they happened, yes. So there isn't really a narrative. They're very matter of fact. If you're looking for a story or a movie constructed in a more conventional style, these two movies...
All right, we get it. We're moving on. These two movies are really similar in style. And besides the stories they're telling, the events they might be documenting, the interviews themselves distinguish them from each other.
They thought it was best that I stay home at Gary's place in case he tried to contact me, call, or show up.
Both movies have a distinct style, maybe presentation, of the events they're documenting.
The tape was never entered into evidence in the first trial.
It sounds like the ramblings of a crazy man, sure.
I agree they possess a difference in tone, but I still think the entire presentation of the interview style is a misstep, a hindrance in telling the story.
I don't know about that. Maybe it's just not done well here. I found Savageland to be better. Maybe it was able to draw me in a way that Horror in the High Desert wasn't.
There's abandoned mines, there's bushes and tree cover. So finding someone it's not easy as people think it is.
I think Savageland was more compelling.
The administrative staff were very concerned about him because I could tell that he was pretty closed off emotionally and he was kind of a shell in his own head. And
since there wasn't a story or action for me to focus on, maybe it came down to the kind of style or this, I think that's a good way to describe it, tone, the tone of the interviews.
And they were informing me that they called off the search. I'm seeing them talk and I'm not comprehending anything.
In the High Desert, the interviews, they're a bit more emotional. Most are delivered by Gary's sister and his roommate.
Was there only 4 people that were really interviewed?
With other people?
You know what? It really doesn't matter. The bulk of the interviews are carried by his sister, Beverly, who is understandably emotional after the traumatic loss of a brother.
Everything was just kind of flashing. Next thing I know, I'm on a stretcher.
She appears distressed, which is understandable. What I did understand was why the roommate was placed at an almost equivalent place of importance in Gary's life.
I asked him where Gary had gone to. Simon didn't know. His roommate didn't even know. To me, that wasn't right.
They treat Simon almost as if he is the second most important person in Gary's life.
Being my brother's roommate, not even asking where he was going to be or.
I've had roommates. Sometimes we didn't speak more than once or twice a week, and usually not for the sake of socializing. It was for trivial housing-related issues. This is not something I could relate to.
Yeah, mate, we know what you're like. You're a hard one to talk to, or we find it difficult to socialize with you too sometimes.
Yeah, that too, but his sister, she's emotional throughout the interview.
It'd been 2 days since I'd reported him missing, and I hadn't slept more than 10 to 15 minutes at a time.
She's almost pleading with the audience. She might be the most important person in Gary's life.
I had people calling and were so concerned and wanted to know where to start looking for him, but not knowing where he was at, where would I have them look?
But there's a distance between them. They have a troubled relationship.
I had no idea that he had this whole other life.
And their somewhat troubled history, as well as some of her actions and the things she seems to be implying.
He was so antsy to get out of there. And a week or so before that, Gary had confided in me that him and Simon weren't getting along very well. It just didn't feel right. So I let the cops know. I just don't trust him. There's just something.
It makes it tough for me to fully invest in the interviews themselves, in believing that she really cares, I guess.
Well, maybe you're not wrong. They do got something of a tumultuous past.
So she had a lot of anger towards Gary.
Sure, you get the idea that there might be some distance, since she blamed Gary for the death of their parents.
Well, I was mad at Gary when Mom and Dad died.
Even though it was his actions as a child which led to a horrific accident, I really couldn't blame her for feeling the way that she did.
And had Gary not hung the lantern up where he was at and left it where it needed to be, there wouldn't have been any problems.
This is a very human reaction, but I do agree it might create some sense of distrust between the audience and her.
When their parents did pass away, you know, she was stuck still raising Gary. And so
maybe they didn't get along or they weren't active in each other's lives. Yeah, maybe it's a bit of a problem as she is almost the main focus of the film.
I was embarrassed that I didn't know exactly where he was at. You know, I'm his sister. I should have known.
I think they're trying to use her as a conduit with which to draw the audience in, establish that emotional connection, make us care.
You know, I could just hear her inside Gary's room sobbing.
For her, for Gary, try to invest us in the story.
Is that what they were doing? I agree. She's trying to be emotional.
You know, you're really making me miss my brother, Gary.
But I find her to be more annoyed or frustrated by the situation rather than sad or depressed.
I was so put off when I got to town. He was so antsy to get out of there.
This is all an inconvenience. Perhaps it's her acting, or perhaps the script and production is somewhat confused by what it is attempting to do, as any formation of this emotional connection is hindered by, if I recall correctly.
I really don't think that you do, Mike. Anything you might recollect from horror in the high desert, it might have been lost in that bottle.
It's kind of sus, yeah.
God willing, I will be able to forget this movie. As if I am haunted by it for any longer, I will ensure your end is of a Hobbesian quality.
It just kind of got old. By the way, you're his sister, so why didn't you know?
The addition of certain elements are of a questionable, if dubious nature. If they meant to create this emotional connection with the audience, I have reservations about the roommate and the sister, both of which create doubts.
And so she held quite a lot of resentment against him.
Perhaps this was meant as a way to create some intrigue, generate interest through suspicion, but this fails to do so. I think it only hurts their attempts at creating this emotional connection between the audience and the characters.
Beverly, on the other hand, was very much in their way. She was in the way, and she was really messing things up.
I can see where you're coming from, but I'm not sure it's a failing on the film's part. I can overlook that. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance, his death are a mystery. No one really knows what happened exactly.
Just wasn't in a place where Gary would have left it. Like it wasn't in a spot he would want to go to explore.
And I can understand that they might be distressed, might not be thinking logically about the situation. They're humans. We make mistakes.
I regret that now. I kind of lashed out at her, and she was super upset, understandably. She needed someone to point the finger at.
We might find their actions, their speculations, and the implications they create to be questionable, but I found it reasonable for them to do so.
And she did not want to have anything to do with me or our show. And I thought, this is a way to help find your brother. I don't understand why you don't want to give me the time or day, but she didn't.
It's entirely within reason. I didn't really ever take either of their claims seriously. I don't think the film wanted us to think hard on either comment, as it doesn't provide much more to evidence either claim and doesn't allow for much time to dwell on.
They provide adequate amounts of time for us to think about it. After all, nothing
Weren't you drunk? How much time did you spend thinking about anything that you were watching?
I wasn't that drunk, all right?
You were pissed.
Still, I might regret saying this, but I don't think he was that drunk. I think the film was trying to create some kind of distrust. Maybe not between the audience and the characters, but it left me wondering how they could be involved in Gary's disappearance.
Beverly really beat herself up about deleting the video.
During all the frustration and the upset and everything, I accidentally deleted it.
That's a problem. If you want us to accept that their emotions are genuine, they shouldn't be trying to make me distrust these people. I should like them, right?
Fair dinkum, mate.
It's also a stupid decision by the production. We don't need to speculate on the nature of Gary's disappearance to believe that someone close to him might be responsible.
Gary became so obsessed with survivalism and find the most remote places, no cell service, no provisions.
As we discover, Gary's hobby is rather extreme. He's a quasi-solo survivalist, a kind of man against nature manner of hiking through the wilderness.
To me, Gary's more of a survivalist. You know, he would go out into the wilderness for, a week or two with just a backpack.
It is a reasonable conclusion that the audience might suspect he was hurt while navigating the dangerous, rugged terrain, maybe attacked by some manner of beast.
Either he finally just injured himself, or maybe he had eaten something.
Maybe, but I still think you're just thinking too much on this one, making something out of nothing. You be a mild pie. The film's got issues, sure. I think you're having trouble connecting with the film that might be more related to the subject of the documentary. I mean, Gary, his personality, who he is, his character.
But definitely private. He kind of just kept to himself in his room, on his computer. Then he was just really kept to himself in his room making his videos.
It might make it hard for some of us to relate to him, to connect with him. I care about him, but
If there was a little old lady that said, "Can you please watch my purse?" he would watch her purse and make sure that it was safe.
we get to see some archival footage of him, video he recorded himself.
Oh my God, sheep. Hi, sheep. Sheep are a lot nicer than people.
We see that he's a little awkward, a bit shy. I think it's part of the reason, at least within the world of the film, that there's not too many people to interview about him, people who know him or might give their opinion on him or his character.
Was so smart that kind of had a hard time connecting with other people.
And if they did have more people to talk to, because after all, they only have Simon and Beverly, they could have at least made the sister more credible by not having her push the blame onto someone else. Maybe give those implications to another character, anyone.
He was trustworthy and amazing.
She would still have that tragic history of family trauma, but it might alleviate some of that distrust or disconnect, the distance.
Yeah, but you could have that as a little bit of, personal growth, overcome some of that history with the realization of what she's lost through the documentary process. It might not be realistic, but it might be more rewarding or satisfying.
I believe that was their intention. She does have the line where she says that,
You're really making me miss my brother, Gary.
But with that, the history and the casting of suspicion or doubt, it does color her testimony.
And you could be right. Still think having more people that could be interviewed would be better, even if it doesn't improve the characterization of their relationship. More people who could recount their experiences with Gary, comment on how they know him, how nice of a guy he was.
Super funny though. Definitely could make you laugh with a couple of his one-liners.
That might help to flesh out Gary a bit more, make us care about him. The extra people don't even need to appear for long. Just a few short clips here or there scattered throughout the beginning to maybe the middle of the film, just to confirm or establish that Gary is someone we should like or care about, show the effect he had on the lives of others. As it is, he doesn't seem to have made much of an impact at all.
He did have one major impact. He caused the tragic death of his parents at an early age.
Dude, not a great example. I would have went with his sister being sad, his roommate I don't know why he's so important, but he seems more frustrated by the inconvenience of missing a flight.
Frustration and indifference are not the ideal emotions you should be expressing towards your audience, unless you wish the audience to become invested due to their own frustration that nothing is being done to help, or that no one seems to care that this person is missing.
And it's not that Gary's a bad guy. He seems like an all-right dude. Sure, he's shy, but he's not a shut-in, but he's a loner. You know, with his long solo wilderness hikes. And they seem dangerous.
It's a choice of the film, though. It's limiting the amount of people we can interview, but the choice was intentional. It's a consequence of, well, maybe you call it a setup, but most of his presence is online.
Hey guys, it's me again. A lot of people have been following the blog and new to the blog.
So he doesn't have many people. He doesn't know many people.
Yes, he has made more of an impact online, interacting with people there rather than in person with the people around him, perhaps due to the fact that he is a closeted homosexual.
And I think he was terrified of being outed in his community. Not a lot of gay people.
As the film expresses, this is a place where that might be frowned upon, thus his social isolation in the real world, due to a fear or anxiety with who he might be able to open up with.
Not a single person in Gary's life knew about his blog.
In reaching out to others in the more nebulous space of the internet, some might even consider it ironic that it is these very people he's trying to connect with, he's seeking validation from.
To see Gary's followers turn on him, that blog was everything to him. And their comments, and to see them calling him a loser, a liar.
His attempts to appease that mob online is ultimately what causes him to risk danger, causes his demise.
And the comments will go back. And he's getting like really hit by his followers. Basically, they don't believe that he came across this,
Oh, my, why you gotta rationalize it like that? You're gonna bring me down. That's a right sorry state to be in.
So this was a really sad story to me.
Little too real for my liking. People just oughta, well, I don't know, but they should be what they will and be well.
It was really sad to see.
We are social creatures and we do what we can to connect with others. If he only felt free to be himself online, then of course he's going to feel pressured by those people he did feel some kind of connection to. And when they started to turn on him,
that said that he was nothing but a lonely loser and that all he was doing was trying to get attention by making shit up.
Well, it caused this dangerous situation for him to go back to the cabin, even knowing that it was probably dangerous.
Just the way that he described what he was looking at, what he saw, how terrified he was, it really scares me.
Just so he could prove to this community that he did find this weird place in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah, but he didn't know it was dangerous. He just felt creeps out by the place.
He's at his home and he's sitting there and he's telling basically what he came across. He's pretty worked up. He's nervous, he's scared. He comes across this cabin. It's like a makeshift cabin. There's smoke coming out of the chimney. And he said he was just like frozen in his tracks. And he just felt this like basically impending doom.
He went back to a place he still felt anxiety from, a place that he wouldn't tell anyone else the location due to his concerns for their safety. He left his dog, Tuco, with his roommate.
Something was off when he asked me to watch his dog, Tuca, before he went out, and he never leaves Tuca. He always takes the dog with him, so I thought that was kind of weird.
And took a handgun. All of his actions before going on the hike, his preparation, lead us to believe that he knew he was going somewhere dangerous, or at the very least, that he shouldn't be going there.
So I don't want to give out the location and just, I'll go out there, find the shelter again. This time I'll bring my camera and firearm.
You think that with the way how the movie seems to stress the importance of Gary's roommate, I know you said it was kind of strange, but maybe they were implying that they were in a relationship more than just friends or roommates. You know what I mean? Or that he was the second most important person in his life due to his social isolation in the real world.
Might be a bit of the latter rather than the former. I recall the movie saying that they bonded over shared interest in trains.
I first met Gary when they were having an event at the Nevada Northern Railway. We both just kind of walked in each other's paths, started talking about trains.
And Gary did try to share his enthusiasm for hiking by bringing Simon along, just the one time.
At the very least, they were not intimate at the time of his disappearance. One of the actors in the film, I won't say character, as his acting is just atrocious.
And a definite disappointment.
Really, it is quite upsetting watching him try to perform.
Gary's final video is truly haunting.
One of them says that he tracked down Gary's love interest, partner, in part due to details he learned from his roommate. And Gary's sister does make the statement that Gary was thinking about finding a new place to live, perhaps formally severing his relationship as roommates with Simon. If Simon was his closest friend in the real world, it might have been more motivation for him to seek validation from his online community, given that they were going through a rough patch and that they were going to be separating, perhaps losing that only connection.
If they were something more, I understand why, at least in universe, the documentary would want to conceal something like that. They did mention the difficulties of being an openly gay man in rural Nevada. Still, it might have meant more to the audience if this was from the perspective of a grieving partner rather than a roommate.
I get that they were trying to set up his reason for going back, or the danger of seeking or finding approval online, but I don't know, I think it causes more problems.
Oh, the tried and tested true formula of horror, warning young people about behaviors which might be considered dangerous or radical. And yeah, maybe there's a fix, but it might cause more problems than it does fix. And Salazar, the subject of Savagelands, he was described as a bit of a loner.
If there's ever a checklist for a serial killer, Salazar would check every box. He was a loner.
I think it works there. The both of you said you liked Savagelands heaps more.
I don't remember saying that. But Savageland also doesn't try to make us like Salazar. They portray him as sympathetic, as a person who is suffering a grave injustice, but liking him is not the primary goal of that documentary.
The raising goes back to that tone. The tone of these two documentaries are trying to establish. Savageland is not trying to do any of that. It's not. I'd say if Horror in the High Desert is an emotional documentary, then Savageland is trying to appeal to your sense of justice, to be a bit more analytical. There are two main subjects who are interviewed.
This Lawrence Ross guy?
A rights activist, investigative reporter, and novelist. And then there's a Border Patrol agent.
Carlos Oliveras, second-generation Border Patrol agent.
They both possess a kind of expertise to the subject of the case and the circumstances surrounding the event set.
What police are calling the Sangre de Cristo massacre has risen to over 20.
I agree that those two are the primary focus of the interviews, but the movie does possess a broader scope of people to interview. Carlos Oliveras and Lawrence Ross may form the bulk of the film's time in order to establish the counter-narrative, but there is still a wide array of people who do appear in the documentary for interviews. People who might be considered experts on various topics, people who were involved with or who handled the case and investigation, and people related to the residents of the small town or who were away during the events.
Savageland, it just had more going on. This movie was trying to dispute claims by the police investigation. state what they thought happened and provide evidence to back it all up. It just had more going on in it.
And maybe it did. They are attempting to refute an established narrative. It's not an emotional plea for the life of Salazar. It's a counter to the injustice done to a small town. Sangre de Cristo as a whole rather than just the injustice of one man.
It still amazes me that the largest single-day homicide in history of the state of Arizona got no attention, zero media coverage.
Then I can agree to that. It's for that reason, at least as to what Ross believes to have happened. The reason why there are so many interviews with people with relation to residents of the small town.
In all my years of law enforcement, never come across anything like this. God abandoned Sangre de Cristo. There's nothing left.
They often feature grieving family members, brothers, sisters, parents of children talking about the tremendous loss.
Jose and his family were some of the ones who died at that tower.
It all lends itself a great deal away. Those are the emotional pleas. They get the audience invested in that kind of thing. They're informing the viewers in a very real, a very tangible way about loss. It's not that they don't describe what was lost, but it's more real than just ways and numbers or statistics could be.
Grace is gone. Where is Grace?
Numbers are abstract. They're easier to disconnect from reality.
Sure. I can see that. Seeing people that were lost and hearing from family about the effects of the tragedy,
And it was only 2 blocks from their house.
The toll it takes on the community, the weight the families have to endure, that feels a lot more real.
Maria had such a strong sense of faith. I don't have that faith, and it hurts me,
That still doesn't explain why I found it easier to connect with Savagelands than horror in the high desert. Maybe Salazar was just the more compelling figure.
People were hurting each other.
Maybe Salazar was just more interesting than a lost hiker in the woods.
And as you can tell, I'm not naked or afraid out here.
And I think it could just be that Savageland, even if it wasn't a more emotional kind of documentary, even if it isn't the way that Horror in the High Desert was relying on emotion, it's more effective at conveying that emotion.
I didn't want to believe it. And to go to the funeral, it's one of the hardest things. It was a closed casket. All the family was there.
It doesn't take as much time or to spend as much time on doing it, but it's just more effective at it. It's brief, but doesn't need to be long in order to be impactful.
There were 9 kids in the preschool and 1 teacher, Lisa Reyes.
The movie still takes the time to establish the character of Salazar.
As for the Putnams, Francisco had been working for them for years. He was almost a friend. They trusted him. They gave him a key.
To define the kind of person that he is, I appreciate that they do that.
You're not wrong. They do give him detail. They establish his interests, flush him out.
Everyone around here knew he was a photographer. He took pictures of everybody.
Salazar was a lifelong Catholic.
We know what his hobbies were, his interests, even the kind of work he did around town, and the people he did it for.
Salazar had spent the summer working as a handyman on the mission, doing odd jobs, running errands for Judith, hanging out with the 2 kids.
I did like that they provided some kind of explanation for why he was able to take the photos, or how he was able to get around town so quickly or maybe safely. The fact that he had a camera and that it was the only evidence of what might have really happened that night.
What everyone else discounted as insane ravings, he documented it all. Something primal and horrible moved through Sangre de Cristo that night.
It was the only thing they had. Even if the images were blurry and lacked detail, they still had them.
Well, both Salazar and Gary, they were kind of loners, and they liked to document the things that they saw. Even if one is the focus of the documentary, the other is the lens which we are detail the tragedy which befell the town in question. The subject of Savagelands isn't Salazar, but the town itself.
The Sangre de Cristo massacre.
Whatever happened in Sangre de Cristo?
To betray the injustice, they have to betray all the families that suffered.
They were not just SDC residents.
That includes Salazar himself. The film gives him a bit more depth because he's the only one still alive at the time.
And the one survivor made a record of it.
They even bring on his sister to talk about him. She wasn't even a resident of the town. And I think she was still on the other side of the border, so Mexico, but...
Would you call that another similarity that these two films share? Sisters talking about their brothers posthumously.
Yeah, I guess so. It's coincidental, I guess. She's more of a character witness, and the documentary doesn't dwell on her in the way that Horror in the High Desert does.
Again, they bring her on for just enough. They bring her on in a way that's most effective.
I guess I agree with you, but I'll just say it, I don't speak Spanish.
Yo creo que Dios trabaja en diferentes maneras de misterios.
Her entire interview it's in Spanish. They do provide subtitles, but there's a language barrier. She's emotional and she's worried, I get that.
It's a bit of a tug on your heartstrings kind of moment. You may not need to know Spanish to simply get that. They do talk about the kind of person he was in relation to the community, the ties he made within that community. It stands starkly against the kind of stuff the police and some of the outspoken individuals were saying.
If there's ever a checklist for a serial killer, Salazar would check every box.
They're just trying to refute.
I understand it's a direct rebuttal to the testimony made by others about the kind of person he was, that he was a loner, a weirdo.
He was one quiet dude. He dropped his sandwich at lunch. Salazar takes a fucking picture of it.
They provide a reason as to why he wouldn't have done what the police are claiming he did.
Exactly. And the motivation of the police, what the police claimed, isn't a very strong one. That he was a psychopath, that he was a loner who went crazy.
He's an outcast. He should be put to death on the spot.
Lethal injection.
Fry his ass.
We see in the movie that he actually cared very deeply for one of the families and their children.
The truth is, he had a different route in mind. From the start, he was always heading here, to the church, to the Putnam family.
You know, I was just thinking. You brought up that the sister doesn't speak English. She speaks Spanish. I was just wondering if, given the trauma that Salazar experienced, if he would have continued to speak English.
To stab them with the flash. Just held their hand, and I sang.
Would he not have returned to his own native language during the interview? At least in parts of it, when he begins to break down. You might expect him to have shifted from English back to Spanish.
That's what you were thinking about? You know what, I'm not about to hold that against the movie.
I wouldn't call it a problem. People do have a more emotional connection to their original primary language, and that they will fall back to it in times of stress. But so what if he continues to speak English? What kinds of factors could have played into that? Degraded mental state or not, maybe he was just doing his best to communicate with the interviewer.
He looked me directly in the eye and he was very specific about what he was saying.
That still may not override the emotional attachment of the primary language. I'm only asking if he would have defaulted to his primary language given the emotional strain.
All right, thou mate, as you will. Or I believe he might have been trailing off into a different language during the very ends of that.
And I sang, Esta niña linda.
As if he's able to give much information himself. During the interview or not, he gave what he gave. What we witnessed from the footage, we can see that night has left an impression on him. It's clear that the event has left him shaken. He's barely there. He's a ghost.
He is not a ghost. He is very much within the realms of the living at that point.
Wait, did you really just say that? Don't be so literal.
I'm not.
He's a gibbering mess towards the end of the footage. He looks like he's about to break down throughout the whole thing.
He appears to be a broken shell of a man as he recounts the events of that night. He's barely holding it together. Where am I wrong in that?
I think he can recall what happened pretty clearly, almost as if it's etched into his memory, almost as if he can't forget what he's seen.
Well, I think it's still with him. Will always be with him. I think the actor's done a pretty good job here. He's owned it. You can tell that he's bored, that he's distressed, that he's carrying all that weight on his shoulders. He's haunted by it.
They're still out there. At least they can't get me in here.
Yeah, he managed to survive the massacre, but he didn't escape it. At least not in the physical sense. Emotionally, mentally, he's still there. He can never get away from it. It will always be there. He's always going to be with them, and maybe until the day he dies.
He's got that 1,000-yard stare, like he's lost part of himself that night. He might not be crazy, but he's losing himself. I think he's breaking down more and more. And after everything we saw from him, I'm shocked he was allowed to stand trial at all.
I seen him, he was just slumped over, quiet with a blank stare.
He was the only survivor, but Salazar never said a single word during the trial.
The lawyer did say that they tried for the insanity defense, didn't he?
Which is why I tried for the insanity defense.
Sure, but he doesn't seem fit to stand trial. Those are kind of two separate issues. His mental state should have been brought into question. It could be argued by his lawyer that he can't aid in his own defense.
Are you mentally deficient?
What? What did I say?
No, forgive me, you were fine. That was just a question that was lingering on my mind. I was coerced into doing this.
Oh, this again. Come on, mate. You really trying to tell me you had that bad of a time with these movies?
Oh, that, yeah. No, it sounded like fun.
That's the spirit, mate. Good to have someone around that shares my enthusiasm.
And I won't go so far as to say that I have any enthusiasm for these movies. They were interesting and I enjoyed them, but I don't know if I'd ever watch them again.
Oh, well, at least you gave it a shot. I'm not all that shocked. Still, I like the movies. In our last discussion, our parting thoughts, it gave me a desire to explore more of that, instead of just digging up someone's camera. See more of that documentary footage aspect.
I understand that you say it's entertainment, but I'm not even saying that it isn't a film, but both of these are pseudo-documentaries. They are fictional accounts.
Look, we already talked about that. They are not attempting to inform the audience, but entertain them. I was entertained, maybe I wasn't captivated. During Horror in the Highlands, I did find myself scrolling through the phone a few times, but I enjoyed them. Sure, due to the nature of it, it's a bit slower, a bit more methodical. I appreciate the commitment to this style.
These are both slow, dull, and ponderous. And there still isn't that investigation you wanted. My hat's off to you. You finally dragged me through the torment of the experience you so longed for.
First off, you are up yourself again. You make it sound like it's
If
an
it matters, I
intonation of-
don't think I missed anything during the parts I wasn't watching the screen. Both movies have a lot of interviews in them, so there's a lot of people talking. Not really an exposition kind of way, but...
That's the quality of it. They're both low budget, but they're leaning into that. Neither needs a high budget due to how they've been composed or constructed. The interviews and the reporting of the events brings it has a kind of grounding, a kind of authenticity that a pseudo-documentary brings. Unlike the last movie, these are a bit more finished, a bit more, grounded. And they don't lean into the supernatural elements. They're entirely believable as a kind of summary or a report documenting these events. They feel like they've been made to be consumed by the wider public. I really enjoy that. Sure, some of what they are talking about does border on unbelievable, but they're presenting it in such a a matter-of-fact manner. They got their argument or their point of view. They're trying to convince us. That just feels a bit more real.
Yes, you've talked about how important that is before. I want to ask, how far can they take that idea? How far before that grounding of yours comes at the cost of enjoyment? If you recorded someone's breakfast where they butter toast and then eat it, I would believe it happened, and I wouldn't care. That doesn't sound enjoyable. I wouldn't want to watch that, even once. These interviews, this style, I agree, it feels believable. It's realistic. And it's not something I'm eager to experience again. They're talking about events which could be exciting. The experience of tracking down a lost hiker in a desolate high desert, following his footsteps through the mountains in rugged terrain, or exploring the aftermath of a massacre in a small town. These are things I would much prefer to actually witness. But even the exploration of that, taking a camera and walking around the town, witnessing the results of the carnage firsthand, the violence that would have been purported to have taken place.
I got a body here. Heinzman.
The latter I wouldn't find as exciting, but it would still be interesting.
Didn't you like Savageland?
That is beside the point. If anything, I found it interesting and more enjoyable than Horror in the High Desert. And yet I hate it because I was promised a zombie movie. Savageland, for its faults, I feel was still better at executing on the premise. It wasn't the story. Both films have a premise. They're trying to relate to the audience these events. One feels better produced than the other.
Savageland was a zombie movie.
The freak eating the people he murdered.
They didn't notice that the teeth marks on the victims didn't match Francisco's teeth. And yet, Francisco has bite marks. They matched the victims.
That's something I'm not going to get into.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, I delivered on that. What are you on about?
It was not a zombie movie. It might have been a movie reporting on the possibility of some sort of zombie attack, or some manner of feral humanoids attacking a small town, but it is not about that event. The story isn't even about the reporting of the event, or the effect on the small town and surrounding area afterwards. The story is a report documenting what happened to the sole survivor of the event, a man unjustly held responsible for that massacre.
He was a person easy to dehumanize.
Didn't we agree that it was about the town itself?
It's a familiar story we've seen out time and time again.
It's desert, sand, hate, fear. Sangre de Cristo.
Look, I think you're simplifying too much. Savageland is the story of a zombie attack.
Both movies focus on a central character. Savageland has Francisco Salazar, the survivor of the massacre at the small town of Sangre de Cristo. The hiker who goes missing in the rugged Nevada mountains outside of Ruth, Gary Hinge. While both movies are focused around these two respective characters in a sense, they're not the protagonists. They're the subject of the documentary.
So what? We're being shown the consequences of that attack. So it's about a zombie attack on a small town. That's what happens. If that doesn't happen, there's no film. There's an attack on the town. Only one person survives, and no one believes in zombies. Thus the survivor, the bloke Salazar, he's blamed for it.
No,
It's a zombie movie.
Look, when we watched The Taking of Deborah Logan, that movie...
The story of Alzheimer's is never about one person. My PhD
wasn't about Alzheimer's. That was about a sort of possession. The disease was just used as a catalyst. The start to get the film rolling. One of the people in the film may be dealing with Alzheimer's, and the reason for the film crew to be documenting everything is her having the disease, but I wouldn't say that the movie is about that.
Well, okay, that's the kinda true, in a sense. Wait, Jack, you see that one?
I've never heard of it.
Shame. It's a good one. You want to give it a watch?
Don't try to lie to him like that.
We're not getting into that one again. It was a fine movie. The taking of Deborah Logan was happening before our eyes. Sure, I might not call it a movie about Alzheimer's. It was a possession, but we were watching a possession by a malevolent force. In Horror in the High Desert and Savagelands, we're watching reports done after the events take place. They are past tense. In the documentaries are explaining the conclusions they've drawn to the audience. In these 3 examples, there is a possession happening. A person's gone missing.
And as you can tell, I'm not naked or afraid out here.
And a zombie outbreak.
I never want to hear another word about the freak eating the people he murdered.
That's something I'm not going to get into.
We have the subjects, the characters, and the events to which they are entangled.
There is an attack on a small town by zombies. What else do you need to know?
There's a bit of wiggle room with the zombie thing. Sort of leave it open to interpretation, but you never witness it because it already happened. But you hear some accounts and you see some pictures were taken.
Some of them were dead.
You can't deny that it happened, and while it is ambiguous as to whether or not they are zombies,
I saw him die. He was dead. I know he was dead.
Perhaps due to the nature of it being a real-world investigation, with the documentarians wanting to leave out the supernatural, there is enough evidence to support the conclusion that they were indeed reanimated dead. Still, it isn't the focus of the documentary.
Fine, whatever, I don't care.
Say, 8 kills may sometimes do.
So, Savageland, it focuses on the details surrounding the night of the tragedy. The documentary detailing the events contradicts the accepted narrative constructed by the police.
Salazar knew every square inch of that town. That's why he was able to move so quickly and kill without anybody realizing what was happening.
Eventually used to prove the guilt of one man in court, the police claim that a man by the name of Francisco Salazar.
We did not arrest Salazar because he was Mexican. We arrested Salazar because he was covered with 15 types of blood.
An illegal immigrant murdered everyone in the small town near the border of Mexico and the United States. The film intends to portray that the story pushed by the sheriff has been fabricated.
And that was the level of analysis in the courtroom. A one-man serial killer army.
A story which claims the sole survivor to be responsible and has resulted in the conviction of an innocent man, which has been characterized as a gross miscarriage of justice.
I would really consider that the background of the documentary. We don't see any of that actually happening.
Get stuffed. I says my real beauty. You mind giving the other one a flick while you're at it?
Yeah, sure. Well, the horror in the high desert, a kind of investigative report documentary detailing the circumstances surrounding a missing hiker who is believed to be dead. It's a series of interviews and some raw footage from the subject in question. A man by the name of Gary Hinge. No one has been held responsible for what may very well be the murder of a hiker who became too curious for their own good. And there are no supernatural twists.
Nailed it. And before we keep going, Marcus, you might want to complain about this one too. Maybe contending that this one isn't about a missing hiker?
No, I only take umbrage with the description of several friends. It's a fine synopsis. I do want to know why you wanted to talk about both of these together.
Like I said before, they're both similar in presentation, the whole documentary style thing. Due to the nature of them, the stories aren't complicated, but not complex. They got that simple premise that doesn't get bogged down with the construction around the reporting of the facts, the events in question. I wouldn't say that they're lacking in substance. and the length of each is about feature length, 90 or so minutes with credits. So I thought we might compare and contrast them just a bit. Give us some more to talk about. Then, well, they still had half a bottle left when we finished Savagelands, and that just didn't sit right with me.
So you're telling me that you knew there wasn't much to talk about in either movie, so
I mean what I said, and I said what I mean. Still, I think it provides some context, a bit more perspective. There's less action, and each one executes this idea in a different way.
You know, I was about to say that the stories aren't all that similar. There isn't much more in the way of contrast, but you mean just the way they are documentaries?
Yeah, something of the sense. There's a bit more to it, but I do think they're rather similar.
Don't pay him any mind. He's a kid with an ant for him. The clockmaker who...
I give it my best.
That has yet to be seen. However, I'm not a consumer of documentaries, but I would go so far as to say that they're not telling a story. Not in the sense of possessing a narrative. They're documenting, explaining, and informing the audience. Certainly there is a story within these two movies, but they eschew the conventional, but without relying on a traditional method of storytelling. Perhaps it was conceived this way. Maybe they couldn't secure the funding or the capital. But it's plain to see the movie kept its spending to a minimum. Everything we learn is conducted in the form of these interviews in mostly static locations. In both, people will sit in a room and speak to the camera. There are very few shots of someone outside, walking around with a camera recording.
From the start, he was always heading here.
Look, I'm not thinking about any of that. Not now, and not while I'm watching. Does it really matter if they kept the budget small? Maybe they can or couldn't get funding. Maybe this was their vision. They got the thing made. That's what counts.
I don't know, Whit. You just can't get what you need or think you need to bring your script or vision to life. Maybe you only get half of what you think you would need to film the script you have. So instead of compromising on quality, you compromise on vision. Maybe in hopes of getting another film that you could convince others to back you on other projects. You know, play the game, cut your teeth. Next time around, maybe you get more. It could matter, but I don't think you need a lot of money to bring some horror movies to life. In some respects, you're going to be creative to work with a low budget. But I think that these movies, maybe one more than the other, they can make effective use of their low budgets. They don't seem like they're expensive to make, and I do find Savageland more interesting. Maybe not in their approach, but their production. Savageland is effective in what it has to offer. I don't dislike horror in the high desert. I think it's good, it's just not as good as the other.
I agree with you, and I think it comes down to their approach. Its focus is on putting forth an opposing narrative to the accepted one.
So who had the resources, the weapons, the political will, the anger, the motive to carry out the single night massacre of an entire town?
It has to establish a motive for Salazar and provide evidence to back up these contradictory claims.
According to Salazar, he's loading up his camera, but Danny shows up on his doorstep, bleeding out like a stuck pig.
It walks the audience through a man's journey during the night of a massacre. In Horror in the High Desert, the subject is Gary Hinge and...
Oh, fuck that.
I agree with you. This, however, is what we have. Horror in the High Desert doesn't focus on the facts or counts in detail for Gary's travel through the wilderness. Gary is the focus of the story, but Beverly, his sister, and Simon, his roommate.
I was embarrassed that I didn't know exactly where he was at. You know, I'm his sister. I should have known.
They're relating to the audience the things they find important, but also the only things they can.
We never talked about that. He never told me where he went hiking, ever. He never mentioned it.
They talk about Gary, his interests, what he was like, what he might have meant to them. In Savagelands, it focuses on Salazar's state of mind at times. It gives us some background on him and his life in the small town. It doesn't go into detail. It's not in depth. The purpose of the information it's providing is to contradict the state's position.
If there's ever a checklist for a serial killer, Salazar would check every box.
That Salazar was a cold-blooded, psychopathic murderer.
You know, he was a drifter.
Francisco Salazar was an illegal who had been living in Sangre de Cristo for 7 years.
You learn enough about him to conclude that he probably wouldn't commit murder, let alone massacre entire towns worth of people in a singular night.
You basically have an illegal who's running amok all over Savageland, killing at random.
The autopsy certificates would have you believe that Salazar was sprinting through town, dispatching victims with a machete, a pickaxe. He was some kind of trained killer.
He seems like an all-right guy. He seems kind. They establish his love of photography. That's the way they explain the evidence of what they have to show from that night.
Everyone around here knew he was a photographer. Took pictures of everybody.
I thought the photography was interesting, really. The way to show a story entirely through photos isn't groundbreaking. It's just not usually done in a movie. The audience might not connect with Salazar in the same way that they do Gary. And just before either of you can jump on it, no, that's not why. You do feel bad for Salazar, for what he went through and survived, just to be held responsible for something he didn't do.
Francisco was the only witness to what happened that night, and then the state killed him.
You do feel that his fate was an injustice. I don't know how anyone could come through this film and not agree. You empathize with the poor guy.
I'm not saying you're wrong, but I didn't connect with Gary. He seems nice, he's a little awkward and shy.
Oh my God, sheep.
You know, maybe it was his voice.
Hi, sheep.
I did feel more for Salazar. The dude just got shafted by the police. And for the life of me, I don't understand why.
We arrested Salazar because he was covered with 15 types of blood.
I know the movie was leaning heavily into the racism angle. Maybe I could see that as the reasoning of the local government.
We did not arrest Salazar because he was Mexican.
The Mexican, the Cholo, the Raza, they glorify death because they have nothing else to look forward to.
All I'm saying is that to prove that kind of case against him in court is a stretch.
All that aside, the film has its explanations for that kind of thing, and we'll come back to those later. But as of right now, Gary Hinge and the emotional connection. Savageland doesn't attempt to establish that kind of connection with the audience, not in the same way that Horror in the High Desert does. Savageland tries to establish the feeling of injustice.
There was no one else left alive to question. He was the only survivor. He was a person easy to dehumanize.
Would you say that it's because Salazar's story is that of a man caught in a terrible situation, the sole survivor of a massacre? It's not just his story, but the story of everyone within the community, and the injustice was done to them. It's the loss of a community, whereas Gary is the only one caught up in those circumstances. It's his story, and he's going missing and is suspected to have met a tragic fate, whereas the tragedy in the other is that of the community of Sangre de Cristo.
Maybe. I do know that the two people interviewed on Gary's behalf, they really do try to establish the character, offering the audience bits here and there, maybe trying to draw us in with some kind of interest.
Yeah, but it's not enough. Like I said, I didn't connect with him. He seemed like an alright guy, he just wandered into a bad situation.
I never suspected you to be a heartless monster. I've never been more
You
proud.
may not have connected with him, but you still sympathized with him, right? You didn't have to like the guy. Just because a movie tries to make the audience like a character, not everyone's going to. The film is going to be a real slump to get through if you don't care about Gary. It's a much more personal film. It's the search for one person who was lost out in the wilderness. And it's not till much later in the movie that you witness, well, his untimely fate.
Barry, you just need to accept it. I know the ways you get about movies, but One of them, it's not nearly as good. Like the rest of the films you've had me watch lately, there's nothing complex about the plot. The story is simple, and if you can even call it a story, there's just not enough of it to really say that it's bad. The execution might be a bit flawed. Savageland is just the better film. The two are similar in the way they tell their story, as you've said, but the way they execute the narrative, Horror in the High Desert, just doesn't do anything as well as its counterpart in this viewing experience. Having us watch them in so close a proximity to one another, it serves to highlight that. Savageland just does everything better.
Ditto. I'm with him on this. It was just kind of all right, but it is the worst version of these two movies. You don't need to look further than the opening to see what I'm talking about. Just look at the opening. The movie starts with, what, a minute of black and white footage? There's shots of the environment. Is this supposed to be the deserts or the wilderness of Nevada? I think Gary was living in Ruth, so I at least hope the film got the locations correct.
Never in my wildest dreams.
But it's just black and white footage of a desert environment.
Did I think when I told Gary something bad is gonna happen?
There's some storms moving in from the horizon, as well as some black and white still photos of carcasses, skulls, rattlesnakes, thunder, and lightning.
Did I think it was gonna be this?
And then you get two different people narrating, talking about their feelings.
I can't imagine what Gary must have been going through and how he must have felt.
How they were worried about Gary and how they thought something terrible might happen to him.
Being so alone and so far out there.
It has all the subtlety and nuance of a student film.
He said that the longer he stood and looked at it,
the photography is almost enough to make me laugh.
the more spooked that he got,
it's a joke, really.
The feeling of dread, the sixth sense that he needed to get out of there.
The production can't be taking this seriously. If they are,
he needed to get out of there.
But it is almost laughable how bad it is. Meaning compressed down in some basic imagery. This would not look out of place in the amateur portfolio provided in Savageland.
The best photographer I've ever seen? No. But
if you splice them together, I doubt you could even tell them apart.
Yeah, all right. The opening of Horror in the High Desert isn't the best, so I give you that
Not
one.
the best. Excuse me, Barry, if I was any less drunk at that time, I would have told you to turn it off. You can't defend this. I thought it was a joke. If I had seen that in a movie theater, I would have walked out and demanded my money back.
I don't know if I would have gone that far, but if in the opening of your horror movie, if the opening is like this, it's a problem. It's like one of those fake trailers or fake movies you see in other media. Like they're trying to make the most realistic joke they can.
As if the execution of the joke is so precise that you're unable to tell if it's a joke or not. It's straddling the line of satire and sincerity.
Look, the opening isn't all that good, sure, but that doesn't make it a bad movie. And sure, Savagelands is much better.
A grisly discovery in the town of Sangre de Cristo this morning, and a number of...
Oh, it's a much more enjoyable experience. I don't think I'm being ridiculous in saying so. And the film looks cheap, even by the current standard we've set. It's probably not the worst looking, but it's certainly not the best.
It is certainly the worst of this little endeavor of yours. I would ask you to find some that would look worse, but I'm half afraid that you would, and you would force me to watch it. I will just say that this looks bad. And you know what? I'll even go a step further. Even Blair Witch, your go-to when you talk about these movies, even that movie looks better than this one.
Here he is, filling out our first slate for our first shot.
That movie came out in what, 97 or 98? How does that happen?
So you're finally saying The Blair Witch was a fine movie. Is that what I'm hearing?
This is Burkittsville, formerly Blair. It is a small, quiet Maryland town.
Yes, Barry. This is what it took to lower my standards. This is the film that finally made me say that Blair Witch was worth watching.
One of them could have possibly been an owl, but the other one was like a cackling.
I would rather watch The Blair Witch than this movie. I hope you're happy.
Actually, now that I think about it, that's a pretty good way to describe horror in the high desert. If someone made a documentary interviewing the close friends and family of those 3 hikers from the Blair Witch, or film students, whatever they were, how their disappearances made the people feel and what they were like, then add in some talk about a trivial amount of detective work.
The fingerprints in the truck didn't match any database, so we didn't know what to do.
Then finish with showing the very last minutes of the movie.
Is this really what it's come to?
Yeah, you know what? I suppose that's an accurate description of the movie.
No, it's not accurate. He didn't mention that it looks cheap, and not in that charming way you mean it, or the way I mean it when I see 2 men in giant robot costumes, cardboard or latex suits, going head to head and fighting each other. This just looks badly done without redeemable value.
I get it, you didn't like it, I did. It doesn't look great, but it looks like a documentary. Most of the movie is done in that interview style, talking to a person. A lighting is flat, but it's functional. I think it would be more distracting if it was done in shadows, maybe more moody or somber. I don't know, that would just be more jarring to me. So most of the shots aren't going to be artistic. They're not going to be bright and bubbly, dark or foreboding. They're not supposed to be. They're basic interview shots. It's not all that interesting or maybe visually appealing. I get that you might have a problem with that. Yeah, it's a little bland. They're trying to replicate this style, a style where function is the most important, and they succeeded.
You hear that, movie? Barry thinks you did a good job.
It's not exactly a captivating approach to cinematography.
Oh, fine, whatever. You sew up yourself you couldn't say light at noon. Sure, the opening is a bit 101 for visual language and basic storytelling. It establishes the movie. The opening sets your expectations, good or bad. It sets everything in place. It's an exploration of the final days at Gary Hinge. For the most part, it sets the tone of this interview, the kind of documentary it's gonna be. It's more emotional. What more do you want?
I'm not disputing what the opening is doing, and it's a very good indicator of, well, it set my expectations for the competency of the filmmaking. I won't say that the opening is bad, at least in the sense of functions. It's functional, it does its job, but it's remedial, basic, maybe because of the style that it is trying to replicate.
And just look at Savageland, it did it better.
Reportedly still missing, because as one police spokesman put it, the whole town is a crime scene.
Its opening sets the tone pretty well. Even if it's basic, you know what to expect, but I feel like it does it better. It's just better.
Spend 30 years patrolling this border. You're going to see some horrible things.
That man is right. It just does the job better. I didn't think it was a joke like I did with horror in the high desert. It's serious.
We all thought it was a mass murder case. Serial killer.
Our thoughts and prayers.
It's not going for black and white storms rolling across the desert with carcasses of dead animals. I will say it was more intriguing. Its approach possessed the kind of gravitas that informed me that it was going to be handling these matters in a more competent way.
Go out to the families of the Sangre de Cristo victims.
They still have the environmental shots, they do, but maybe the cameras...
But then the photos emerged.
Well,
changed.
They're not done in black and white.
Changed everything that we thought about.
The footage is of the Arizona desert. It's kind of matter of fact. The narrators are discussing the subjects that are about more than just one man.
It's true. There's been more than a few who have gone missing from the area. But look what's going on.
This has maybe more going on in it than just a hiker who went missing.
Drug trafficking, human trafficking, smuggling, weapons, gang activity.
It looks to talk about deeper issues within the culture and society.
38-year-old Francisco Salazar, an illegal immigrant, has been charged with over 24 counts of first-degree murder.
Focusing on the individual to talk about society and the issues facing it.
Because I know what these people are capable of.
If this guy actually killed the whole...
I don't know about any of that. There was more production value in the footage.
You lose one person, that's a tragedy. You see a whole town wiped out.
The locations being used, the abandoned buildings, the deserted towns of the American Southwest, the narration talking about the systemic problems of disappearances in Arizona. It's very fitting considering the subject matter of the documentary.
South Arizona, the vanishing capital of the United States.
Just disappeared. Gone in one night.
Look, I get it. Savagelands wins outright, all right. Maybe with a bit more of a budget behind it, with the author having more of a message, thinking of it as more of a persuasive essay to get his views across to the audience.
The photos show us the truth. Ross found the truth, but he couldn't see it.
The other is a bit more, it's a bit more personal, a bit less well-funded. It's of a singular person of interest. It's not got a broader message or appeal. It's just about one man, a man who goes missing in the woods, and its story is not universal.
One man is like all men, and all men dying is just a succession of one man dying?
Yeah, why the hell not? There is one area that I believe the comparison is not favorable to Savageland, and that, as odd as it may be, is in the sound.
You mean like the Foley? The adding sounds, footsteps or sounds that's not being picked up so they have to add it in later. What?
The choices of ambiance or background music is better in Savagelands. What they're using to influence or establish the tone, making it a bit creepier or spookier, a bit more tense or scary, that which they use to enhance the mood. Well, I believe it was John Carpenter who said that background music should be like wallpaper. You don't notice it, but it has an effect. The choices they make with the sound may not be authentic to a documentary, or at least a documentary about the series subjects they're going to be discussing within, but it's not going to be pulling you out either.
Didn't you just say that Horror in the High Desert did it better? I swear that's how you started this, right?
No, I like the choice of the music in Savageland better. Maybe their implementation. What I didn't like is the mixing.
At this point, it's 8:15 p.m.
There's times when the background music is much more than background. Perhaps it was the surround system we were watching it on, but...
At this point, the prosecution case starts to get a little shaky.
It was just much louder than it should have been. It was, at times, overpowering, or at least...
The autopsy certificates would have you believe that Salazar was sprinting through town, dispatching victims with a machete, a pickaxe. He was some kind of trained killer.
Salazar knew every square inch of that town. That's why he was able to move so quickly and kill without anybody realizing what was happening.
At the very least, it was competing with the voices of certain individuals during interviews or narration.
Oh, you mean like they didn't mix it properly? Maybe they needed another pass on the levels. I can see what you mean, yeah. At times, yes, it's like that.
Maybe. I don't really remember it that well. If I don't remember it, it couldn't have been that big of a deal. Maybe there was one scene in Savageland where Oliveris, he was giving a tour and I felt that the music was just a little bit more powerful. I really didn't think about it too much. Maybe an ominous sting here or there was just a little more annoying than it should have been. I don't know.
I recall it from most of the film, the background music being just a little too loud. The choice of background music in Horror in the High Desert, including the opening, is entirely forgettable. like wallpaper. It's there, you don't notice it. It does the job any background music would do. The one thing I think it does is it gets the levels right. Maybe it's more appropriate music for the kind of documentary that it is. The choice of music in Savagelands is bordering on spooky.
But I don't think I'll be holding that one against them. But it has maybe sadness to it. Like I said earlier, just sets the tone a bit better.
As much as I liked the film, I don't know. The whole court process is underexplained. There's nothing there. I'm just really unhappy with the representation of the process. It just doesn't sit right with me. In Arizona, you can be executed while waiting for your case to be appealed. The only thing that's going to stay that is a special request, but it's also the length of time from conviction to execution.
I'm also proud that this state is carrying out Salazar's sentence in half the time it took to do the same to Timothy McVeigh.
People can spend more than a decade waiting for their sentence to be carried out. From the time of the massacre to the time the movie was released was only 3 years?
Well, I wouldn't know anything about any of that. About court, only ever got a few traffic tickets, paid them by mail. Never even walked into one of those. No thanks, bit stiff for my taste. Always figured I'd walk in with the less challenges that I walked out with. So it all seemed fine to me.
It's hardly my field of expertise either. I'm not one for the arcane rituals and procedures of a court of law. What I do know is if someone attempts to convince you to represent yourself, they do not have your best interests in mind.
I think everyone knows that. Come on, even if you guys should be able to look at this and feel that something's a bit wrong, even on a basic level, it takes longer than this. I'm not.
Yeah, well, films just do that kind of thing. They speed her up a bit. Besides, the movie gives us something of a date. Plays the massacre in June, July 2011. The movie released in 2014. That's 3 years. Same's enough for me.
That's 3 years from the date of the murders. His arrest was the following day. Who knows how long the actual investigation took. But can you imagine the time it would take for forensics to sweep an entire town?
They could only do forensics on 7 partial corpses that were intact enough to be tagged and ID'd. The coroner said on the stand, how do you run DNA tests on 20 square blocks of bloody sand?
It wasn't that large of a town. As I recall, it had only a population of 50 or so. A small town with a few streets. Given the nature of the situation, the high-profile nature of the case, I'm sure more resources would have been dedicated on a perhaps federal level. More would have been done to assist the local law enforcement.
Didn't they say that it was the 3rd largest single-day massacre in your history?
It still amazes me that the largest single-day homicide in history of the state of Arizona got no attention, 0 media coverage.
I believe it was something to that effect.
None of that matters. Okay, sure, it would affect things, but it's still a large investigation. They're going to be spending days combing across the town.
Because as one police spokesman put it, the whole town is a crime scene.
They're going to be determining what happened and documenting all the evidence. And spread across such a wide area with so much destruction, that is going to take time. They don't have to worry about their lead suspect going anywhere. I believe in Arizona it's 10 days in custody to be arraigned, but charges can be added after the arraignment. And yes, he would have the expectation of a speedy trial. Normally, that would set the limit at, 150 days while in custody to get to a trial? This is a capital case, however, as he's facing the death penalty. They don't have to even start the trial for a year and a half.
And so what? I'm still not quite following your sore spot in all of this. They got 3 years and they don't even exactly inform us as to when Salazar's trial took place. So what?
Look, there's A modern example of, well, something similar, maybe not in total fatalities, but the Waukesha parade attack. That was high profile, and from the man's arrest, I won't say his name, from his arrest to the trial's closing statements, it took almost 11 months. The jury took 3 hours to decide, and his sentencing didn't happen for another month. That's just shy of a year after the heinous act took place. We know that the jury took just half an hour to decide Salazar's fate.
We convicted Mr. Salazar, as I remember, in about a half hour.
This is no 12 angry men. Just looking at Salazar, you know the attorney didn't have much he could use besides conjecture or speculation.
But Salazar never said a single word during the trial.
He has the insanity defense. I'd be surprised if he had anything else.
But it didn't make any sense, which is why I tried for the insanity defense.
I'm shocked Salazar wasn't convinced to take a plea deal. Perhaps they would offer life in return for the admission of guilt. I wonder if that would be a factor in his sentencing. He was an illegal immigrant. Would he be deported?
Illegal immigrants usually serve their sentences before they're deported.
Kinda surprised they didn't return his boy in Mexico to his family. Not sure how that one works.
Do you know where Salazar gets buried? He gets buried right here, in the state of Arizona.
I'm not. Were you even following the film?
If you're wondering if he would be deported or not, why aren't you surprised that they wouldn't return the body to Mexico or his family?
Yo pienso que él hubiera estado mejor si se hubiera ido a México.
I was wondering if his status as an illegal immigrant would have affected the decision to offer him life in prison in exchange for a plea of guilty.
Because of his status as an illegal immigrant. Yeah, right. Back to what I was saying. They have to investigate, and that takes time. Salazar would have been in custody once he was medically examined, and I can't imagine that the detectives would have gotten much out of him for their investigation.
He was raving when we caught him. He was raving when we put him in that jail cell.
He's just a babbling, incoherent mess. It's going to come down to the evidence gathered in the town, not any of his statements.
Just because he's not making any sense doesn't mean they're gonna ignore his testimony. Like that interviewer decide if he was crazy or not.
He was, in layman's term, completely sane.
They can't just ignore what he's saying.
Yes, but that was an interview conducted with Salazar, perhaps a psychiatric evaluation. This is all going to take time, which they do have since Salazar is, again, in custody. It takes a lot of time for a court to move forward on anything. Dates have to be set. Motions need to be heard. He's going to be waiting in custody for a long time. Even everything that goes into setting up a trial, the pre-trial process, that takes an incredible amount of time. Based on his background and the nature of the crimes, he won't be making bail. If the judge set bail at all, the judge could have chosen not to set a bond or set one that would have been unaffordable. There are things like an arraignment, a probable cause conference, a preliminary hearing just with the state they found Salazar in. The circumstances following the event and how he was discovered. The judge is going to decide that there's sufficient evidence for the state to bring a case against Salazar. And since this is a felony, it would be bound over to the district court. And once it's bound over to the district court, they're going to have to do a felony arraignment. Then you have the pre-trial process, conferences between the state and the defense to determine if there's any pleas. They're going to talk about the charges, motions from the lawyers of either side, court appearances, discovery, negotiations. This kind of thing, it just takes time, and we haven't even gotten to the trial yet. There's the jury selection process, opening statements, the presentation of evidence. I'm sure there will be some expert witness testimony for things like DNA evidence. Some of the investigators, no one was left to
Easy
actually
there,
witness
mate.
the crime.
Just take a breath. I get it. You're saying that it's all gonna take time. We get that. You just need to relax. You sound like Salazar. You're still on the ramble.
He was babbling, and I thought I was going to lose him, which I eventually did.
Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to explain the trial process.
I don't think this is necessary. This is a trial we never see and is only ever briefly summarized.
Maybe, but the entire process, it still takes a lot of time. It can take months.
And had we not already decided that there is a 3-year gap between the date that
God abandoned Sangre de Cristo
and the execution of Francisco Salazar?
Okay, but the amount of time isn't even... It's the fact that a trial even took place. From the interview footage with this psychiatric evaluation, Salazar is clearly unwell.
It's certainly a laudable effort, boy, the police to get so much done so quick a time. And I'd still say that he's barely keeping it together. He's not even doing that much. He looks like a broken man, looks to be in the process of a mental breakdown.
I expected to see a monster. I seen him, he was just slumped over, quiet with a blank stare.
Yes, I agree. So it's so strange that she claims he's not insane.
I did not find anything about him that was psychotic, his behavior, anything he said to me. He was, in layman's term, completely sane.
I agree he's not, but that may not be a good thing.
Are you trying to imply that it's a bad thing that he's not crazy? Because she's telling the audience he's not crazy. Because from an outside perspective, we know that his story is true? Or is it because she's saying that he believes his story is true?
Even though his story sounds like it might be a little bit, crazy and out there.
That's not a great definition. You can be crazy and delusional. Believe in something that's not true. That's pretty much crazy, right? Delusional? Something like that?
I take umbrage with the fact that she is telling the documentary that. I don't think it's exposition. If the defense is trying for insanity, would that be used against him in court?
Well, yes, if it's a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. Now, it's what we see during the interview. Salazar's lawyer should have motioned to have a hearing on competency.
But Salazar never said a single word during the trial.
Even if he wasn't sure if Salazar was or not, that alone would have taken a few months to resolve. A competency exam can take a long time. The resources available to do so are usually stretched thin.
You might be forgetting this thing called a high-profile case, probably with a lot of upset people. I'm thinking that kind of thing might light a fire under someone. Get that review taken care of. Make sure it got done.
I'm of a similar mind. Not only would the right people step in order to do so, I'm sure it would have come back with a positive result. You might have a problem with their findings, but I would guarantee it's coming back that he's competent.
What are you talking about? Look at him. He's babbling and sobbing. He's incoherent. What makes you think that he's competent?
It was his same body and same face, but it wasn't Danny.
How can you be so confident in that? I mean, just look at the footage. Go watch the movie again.
He was babbling, and I thought I was going to lose him, which I eventually did.
You have gone too far. You are
He shouldn't be found competent. He should be found unable to assist in his own defense. As a high-profile case, there should be more people looking at the footage, more people paying attention.
That the largest single-day homicide in history of the state of Arizona got no attention, zero media coverage.
Yes, it probably would have been expedited, but That the state would allow a man in his condition, a babbling, incoherent mess who's alternating between sobbing and hysteria.
He was dead, and then he came after me, and I had to stop him.
Just the things he's talking about, only to become unresponsive, that he's going to be allowed to stand trial. I mean, how is he supposed to communicate with his defense counsel? I just don't understand. I don't understand how this is allowed to proceed.
But it didn't make any sense, which is why I tried for the insanity defense.
And because the attorney did allow it to proceed without motioning for a competency review, I think there would be real grounds for an appeal based on the performance of his attorney. Ineffective assistance of counsel.
Well, he is a public defender. He works with the court system, so
For the last time, public defenders are contracted through the courts. They do not work for the court. And for that matter, judges are supposed to be impartial. They do not work for the state, the police, or the prosecution. I'm having some real trouble with believing that this court system is impartial.
Your defendant is nearly catatonic and unresponsive. Even if he were to know that he could appeal his case based on ineffective assistance, he may not know how to articulate that. He may not know he can articulate that, and he may not be able to.
This is Arizona. All death penalty convictions are automatically reviewed at the state Supreme Court level, and the most common of those being the issue of ineffective assistance of counsel. Another party has to review everything, which is part of the reason that usually the death penalty takes more than a decade to be carried out in that state. No new evidence is gathered during the appeal. They're only going to look at what exists, but you have things which happen that can't be overlooked.
That the teeth marks on the victims didn't match Francisco's teeth.
The statement made by the jury foreman. I don't know. You might be able to argue that there's bias there, but there could be an argument like the one Ross makes that
there are very few minorities who have gotten a fair trial, an all-white jury.
with the media sensationalism, it's going to be almost impossible to find an impartial jury. Maybe Ross is right.
You
Maybe
might be getting carried away. You gotta remember, this is fiction. It's the universe of the film. It's just not real, mate.
Zero media coverage.
I was surprised as well that they had him play himself. I don't believe he does a bad job of acting. It's adequate. Does it count as a fictionalized version of himself?
I just think he might have been right. I don't know much about the trial, but it seems like the deck was stacked against him.
Everybody saw where it was going, so of course there was nothing but closed doors.
The court does, in several ways, appear to possess a bias against Salazar.
The photos are not evidence.
The judge didn't want them. Pirano didn't want them.
At least someone else noticed, but is it like Ross said, that it's impossible to get a fair trial as a minority or an illegal immigrant in the American Southwest or not? I mean, you heard that Gus guy.
The Mexican, the Cholo, La Raza. It's a culture that celebrates violence. They glorify death.
The guy from the radio show, the different people, the locals that were interviewed.
What do you get when you cross an illegal with an octopus?
These damn illegal Mexicans come over here and do all their drugs.
All of it together, it seems kind of convincing, you know?
No, mate, sorry, I don't. You're gonna need to explain that one. Can't say I know much about the climate of the United States. I keep myself well and clear of those things. Do keep in mind that this could all be from Ross's perspective.
Let's not forget, Arizona embraced the KKK after Reconstruction. When we're talking about lynchings, Arizona had almost as many as anywhere else in the country.
He's trying to bolster his point, so to speak.
Really? You've been here, what, at least a decade? You're going to tell me that you're unfamiliar with things like the political climate?
He just doesn't want to talk about it. That's it, isn't it? Come on, give me your thoughts already.
Oi. I may have grown up near a border, raised in a small town, but keep me out of your tribalism. It's all downright nasty, and I just don't want to be part of it.
Fine, keep your head down, buried in the sand, just like one of those birds you lost a war against. No, maybe that may have played a part in the area. I won't say that definitively that it wasn't due to the racism of the community or a region which got Salazar convicted.
I absolutely believe that an Hispanic man who is also an illegal immigrant can get a fair trial in the state of Arizona.
Even if the filmmakers would come out and say for sure that it is the case, there might be enough in the film to make a rather persuasive argument for. And I don't mean to diminish anyone's experience, but what matters is the content within the movie.
Did you really have to say that? You just said a whole lot of nothing. At least Barry was honest about not wanting to talk about it. If you're saying that what's in the movie is what matters, then they're not trying to be subtle.
What?
I don't know, but it sure can pick lettuce.
A lot of lettuce. These damn illegal Mexicans come over.
Gus, the various people, I think Ross is right. They're prejudiced against Salazar for whatever reason. Maybe it's his background or his ethnicity.
Characters in a work of fiction can say any kind of thing that they want. I suppose it might come down to whether or not the movie, anyone within the film rebuts any of that, or those people treated as wrong, or that their points of view are misinformed.
We're talking about a place where life was cheap. Illegals arriving illegally, doing illegal things.
Me, I think they're downright funny.
I don't hear him trying to build that wall between here and Canada.
Yeah, okay, I would say that it does. It doesn't treat any of the claims that Gus is making or...
You basically have an illegal who's running amok all over Savageland.
The newspaper cartoons, the jokes, the comments from the people of the area, they are kind of ridiculous.
You know, if you go out there like they did in the old days in the John Wayne movies and hang one where everybody can watch, and one day they're going to stop doing it.
Ross is pretty vocal about all of that. He doesn't shy away from combating any of it.
To carry out the single night massacre of an entire town, it's a familiar story we've seen played out. Nat Turner and Scottsboro Boys, the Tulsa Race Riots, Zoot Suit Riots, Camp Grant Massacre, Operation Wetback, Rodney King,
Sangre de Cristo.
He's taking it on, and I don't disagree with him. Racism sucks, but what we see with the trial, I don't know. The court system itself.
Judge Jack Hudson has instituted a full media ban with no cameras permitted in the courtroom and no media personnel allowed within 200 yards of the courthouse.
It seems to be doing something shady. It seems like there's a bias. Maybe the jury might have convicted an innocent man.
Yes, the film certainly provides a heavy-handed commentary on racism. That was my initial complaint about the movie.
You know, he came here with the wrong idea. Everybody saw where it was going. You know, sorry.
For everything it is, I found it interesting. And if I disregard the genre and my opinion that it hardly counts as a movie, my biggest complaint would have been how forced that point of view was.
As a journalist, I deal in facts, not speculation.
How heavy-handed the messaging was. By the end of the movie, my complaints, they had been alleviated. And if
Wait,
you remember...
so you are agreeing with me, right? He is agreeing with me.
Course he is. Not like you're gonna find disagreement here. Racism sucks.
While Barry is horrible in his own right, such as his love of gamesmanship, yes, you are right. There is a context of racism formed by the counter-narrative within the film.
He must be pretty pleased with himself. He snuck in here, he hid here, he killed here, he's executed here. But even in death, he manages to avoid being deported.
I won't speak on the reality, let's make that clear. I'm not offering any real-world interpretation. My commentary is simply about the movie. So I will say this, no one is going to disagree with you. That is only a surface-level interpretation. Racism is or may be involved, but that's not the whole truth. It may be the perspective of Ross, that it is the answer to the injustices we have seen committed. And this is a documentary which appears to be trying to form the foundation for his argument. So it is going to find those instances of racism and highlight
Just
them.
makes sense. Stop tiptoeing around the subject. Look, I'll do it right now. I'm saying that something fishy is going on with the court system.
Francisco was the only witness to what happened that night, and the court killed his photographs, and then the state killed him.
The trial of Salazar just doesn't sit right with me. Yes, maybe it's racism, but the jury found him guilty of everything within, half an hour? From the amount of time it took for him to be convicted, sentenced, the appeal, the execution, it just seems wrong to me.
I'm with Marcus on this one. It played a role, but it's not all there is to it.
We arrested Salazar because he was covered with 15 types of blood.
I don't know if the investigative reporter is the one behind the documentary, but he's got some strong opinions on the topic.
The truth is that I'm the one who found the photos. I'm the one who released them.
He's definitely one of the main contributors, both with the length of time he's interviewed and as he's the one supplying the camera film. He's probably the one who's got the negatives. That makes it his film. He's got the only evidence which can provide any evidence to the counter-narrative. It's the most important thing about this story then. It's his bias, his view.
Something of the kind. Perhaps Ross has been affected by, is it confirmation bias? If he is the primary force behind the documentary, or at least the one putting forth the most likely or strongest argument for a counter-narrative. This is an excellent commentary on bias in journalism.
Except they got it all wrong. The photos show us the truth. Ross found the truth, but he couldn't see it. He got scared. I don't blame him.
It is an irony that he is allowing his prejudices to affect his conclusions. He is convinced, in much the same way the people who are eager to convict Salazar are convinced.
He's an outcast. He should be put to death.
Lethal injection.
Fry his ass.
They have allowed outside influences to affect their conclusions. The entire narrative which has been formed over the course of the movie has come from the perspective of Olivares.
57 people died here, and the local newspaper ran one obituary. The one white guy from Heinzman.
The other primary contributor, he's been discussing what he believes to have happened and says something near the beginning to the effect of,
started seeing some things that were getting harder to explain.
Now it's a spooky line. It almost seems entirely to set up a scare, maybe to enhance the chilling narrative, and it's much more than a simple throwaway line. It's hardly fit for a documentary.
Bodies that weren't just rotted by the sun. They had been chewed, but nobody in my line of work talked about it.
The entire time, you don't really hear Rawls's interpretation of these events. That doesn't come till the end, and that revelation of what he believes is preempted by the commentary from Olivares. Perhaps we've been led to believe that Ross is in agreement with the evidence as presented and the conclusions therein. But towards the end of the film, we are explained Ross believes the cause of the massacre to be otherwise.
Same old monster, controlling the power structure by day, hiding behind masks at night.
Despite his conclusion to be the more realistic one, more likely to have actually happened in the real world, I found it ridiculous. Even laughable with the story we have just been told.
Of course, there's always a different perspective, isn't there? Not to steal your thunder, mate, but it could be a double bluff. The narrative just laid out to us is ludicrous. A commentary on how easy it is to be taken in by a story. How conspiracies are made up by people, showing the evidence in just such a way.
A little comforting, a wink.
Being affable, friendly, certain, and taking us on a journey.
Coming out of the fields, he headed into town and came across Ron Templeton.
A way the audience could be sucked in as we're following him as he walks through the town.
Salazar runs until he reaches the edge of town. At this time, it's about 8 p.m.
We're almost personally there with him. He's talking to us. He's detailing all these different things. He appears to have all manner of evidence to back him up.
Salazar was also charged with murders that happened at the water tower. But there's not a single piece of evidence to indicate that Salazar was ever there.
He's appearing confident and certain what he's saying. He's even got a proper background.
Carlos Olivares, second-generation Border Patrol agent.
Spent 30 years patrolling this border. You're going to see some horrible things.
Position of authority, which puts him in a position of power. And he's telling us what no one dares speak about.
Started seeing some things that were getting harder to explain. But nobody in my line of work talked about it.
Gives it an element of danger, mystery, some intrigue. What he's saying is irrational. Maybe because it's a movie we believe him. You seem to have been taken in by the story too. People believing in the most outlandish of things, because the reality of the situation is just grim, maybe even too horrible to believe.
It keeps people in line.
That might be true, but only if you're willing to say that the end of the film is a complete fabrication. An outright lie to the audience.
You got me there, May. Still, just because that's what is most likely happening, even downright as improbable as the reality is.
And in my professional opinion, he's not lying and he's not crazy.
It is an interesting meta-commentary, even if the filmmakers didn't intend to say that. It's something which can be drawn from the movie. Our people, anyone, can be led to believe outlandish, even outrageous things. All it takes is the right ingredient.
Okay, but what does that have to do with court and Salazar's conviction? Was he convicted due to racism or not?
This is the community that we are. We do take an eye for an eye.
Oh, Prawley, it's not the whole answer, but it is part of it. Racism might have helped to convict Salazar, but my conspiracy theory-prone friend here is suggesting is that it's not the main culprit, more of a scapegoat, an unwitting accomplice.
Which is why you didn't want to get your hands dirty.
There's your overactive imagination, Mike. Always getting funny ideas about this or that.
God damn it,
you
Barry.
ought to be careful.
Salazar may have been convicted due to the narrative being supported, that racism and bias affected the jury. Both narratives, the one provided by the police investigation.
The autopsy certificates would have you believe that Salazar was running through town, dispatching victims. He was some kind of trained killer.
And the one posited by Ross are believed and supported through certain ideologies and perspectives.
And we will be watching the border for all future Salazars.
There's a lot more Salazars out there. More Riveras, more Sanchez's. It's a matter of when, not if.
The narrative formed by Olivares is not. I perhaps could be wrong in declaring this, but I am certain that it is the only story which bears no relation to race.
7 weeks after Salazar's execution, the mutilated remains of 2 campers were found in the Tonto National Forest.
If the people who believe Salazar committed the crimes due to his race and ethnicity are ridiculous for believing thus, then Ross is equally ridiculous for his belief in his narrative for the very same reasons.
Once more, see, racism is bad.
Thank you, and as pointed out, Olivares' narrative, which we have been led to believe to be the correct one, relies on the idea of a vast conspiracy which has been committed at some level of the government of the United States. It's not certain how far it may go, whether it is a local, state, or even federal.
Salazar staggered into Desert Highway 67. The only truck to stop, co-owned by Mario Chascarrillo, turned around and drove him west to the nearest town with a hospital, Heinzman. The hospital contacted the cops.
You notice that the court system seems to be operating strangely.
Judge Jack Hudson has instituted a full media ban.
There is also mention of Border Patrol agents by Olivares.
Bodies that weren't just rotted by the sun. They'd been chewed, but nobody in my line of work talked about it.
That at least on some level, the sheriff himself.
It doesn't matter. The photos are not evidence.
Maybe even the entire law enforcement within the region.
I would tell the local authorities that they are wrong, that these are as authentic as it gets. I'm frankly surprised their own people having looked at the photos, have been able to confirm the truth of the pictures.
I was just about to say that you're crazy. That what you just said is crazy. That there's no way that that could happen. But this is a zombie movie.
During the first trial, I tried to contact Shas Carrillo, the truck driver who picked up Salazar. He didn't want to talk, but after the appeal was lodged, that's when I got this phone message.
Mr. Ross, I'm sending you something. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to know.
A couple of days later.
Funny how all that works. I'm with you, mate. To believe that kind of thing, it seems a little nuts.
If you ever believed a government would lie to its people in an effort to conceal the truth in the interest of public safety, you only have a few more steps further. And really, the government lying, covering things up, we can agree that is far more likely to happen than some sort of reanimation event, an attack by the living dead.
Yeah, sure, I'll believe that.
So with that possibility at the forefront, we can return to your initial dissatisfaction with the perceived manner in which the court handled this case. We can see how it may allude to the greater alleged conspiracy and not just a fabrication of delusional minds.
They didn't notice that the teeth marks on the victims didn't match Francisco's teeth. And yet, Francisco has bite marks. They matched the victims. How can you botch that?
But you're stating that due to this conspiracy, they convicted Salazar. That even if there was a motion for a competency review, the government was going to just ensure that he was declared legally fit to stand trial. Also, they could tie up a loose end.
Well, it sounds like bullshit, but I still believe it.
That's something I'm not going to get into.
I don't know how they keep something like that a secret. If it's taken out whole towns, causing all kinds of disappearances.
South Arizona, the vanishing capital of the United States.
But if they were trying to keep that quiet, I fully believe the government would make some kind of attempt to do so.
Stay on topic. I've no intention of falling down yet another rabbit hole.
Oh, come on, mate. You love doing that. Just earlier
As
today...
I was saying, it is not only the competency review. There are other parts.
But I can't enter these photos as evidence. I'd be disbarred.
The lawyer, someone rather fresh by certain standards.
The attorney they gave him was on his third case. Before that, he handled some counterfeiter and some petty thief.
You said he was incompetent and perhaps inexperienced. That is the perfect defense attorney for the situation. And as we both know, Salazar didn't have the means to retain his own legal counsel.
Since Salazar would have been using a public defender, the court itself would have been the one to assign his attorney. For something this high profile, it doesn't seem right to have him assigned.
There's almost nothing that you could say to change people's minds.
Even if he knew he could cite ineffective counsel or a breakdown of communication, they could deny the motion without some kind of evidence, and it could have been viewed as a delayed tactic. He doesn't get to pick and choose his attorney.
Have someone inexperienced assigned to handle the case. Just allow them to be overwhelmed.
Even planting the possibility, the idea.
You don't need to work with someone directly to have them benefit your goals, though it would go better if he were being pressured by someone.
What about the jury? They still have to convict him of the crimes. They're supposed to be impartial. It would be easier to have a bench trial where the judge is the one to decide guilt. It's not unheard of in Arizona, though it would be unusual.
And perhaps that's where the racism narrative might be explained.
Are you going to sit there and roll over, or are you going to fight for what's right and for what's yours?
The context around the situation was, perhaps, maybe not manufactured, but amplified.
Listen to me, I've been telling you this for years. Well, I'm telling you, you can't ignore me anymore.
Fear and anger towards illegal immigrants, racism. It would be difficult for a media blackout to keep people from knowing some facts or details surrounding the case.
It's called sequestering. You would sequester the jurors so they're unbiased. and you might need to have them brought in from another county in order to ensure that they don't have any ties to this one, to ensure a fair trial.
Is that what it's called? A judge is a known party. His decisions would be scrutinized, but a jury.
Based on the overwhelming amount of evidence given, we convicted Mr. Salazar, as I remember, in about a half hour, which was longer than it probably should have taken.
I believe everything said within their deliberations is beyond the scope of recordings. From my understanding, they're confidential. So the reasoning doesn't need to be discussed. It's off the record. Not that there isn't an overabundance of evidence which can be used against Salazar.
But Salazar never said a single word during the trial.
Which is why I tried for the insanity defense.
And if he isn't providing a good defense, that might further motivate them to find him guilty. All that needs to happen is provocations of racial fear and insecurity.
That's tough evidence to overcome.
The defense still has to pick the jury, but he is inexperienced, and during the voir dire, he can only challenge or excuse a juror so many times.
Again, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence of something having happened. And with the lack of defense, they only need but twist it a little to create the perception of the events. The racial dissent is only there to help motivate the outcome. And if in reality the circumstances were brought to light, they are simply too extreme to believe.
Something primal and horrible moved through Sangre de Cristo that night.
Which brings us to the investigation. Even if the investigators are not within this wide a conspiracy, what does the evidence even tell you?
And that was the only real evidence. And the local will to investigate was non-existent. So the photos exist in a vacuum.
Reanimated corpses are not exactly believable, so they're not going to find that. They're only going to see what is left behind. Violence.
This is where they found Templeton's truck, the blood trail that went off into the wash.
We never found Ron Templeton's body.
Like a few zombies, perhaps a few corpses walking or staggering into the village. Shambling things they are all. They start attacking people, not with weapons, but biting.
At this point, the prosecution case starts to get a little shaky.
There's no vehicles, no tire tracks of a force leading its way into or out of the town.
When you look at the crime scene, you realize that this carnage wasn't random. They were always heading in one direction. They were heading north.
But they attack and their numbers grow or swell with their victims. Only thing they're gonna see is the results of people fighting each other.
And from that, they might either conclude that the entire town broke down, were enraged or frenzied, to the point of mindless, furious beasts ripping each other to shreds, like the film The Crazies, or that the violence is the result of one man, perhaps who also broke down. He's the only survivor, and they can't find some of the residents' bodies.
We never found Ron Templeton's body.
They can only do forensics on 7 partial corpses.
The blood trail that went off into the wash.
Are you asking me a question right now, or do I just let him keep talking? Is he waiting for someone to actually answer him?
Sometimes I'll ask a follow-up, just to humor him. Now, I guess it's easier to convince people of one man going crazy, especially when he appears to be, than to explain a whole town just going, well, mad as a cut snake. You don't need the investigators to be on this phrase conspiracy. The truth's already unbelievable. The people gathering evidence, they're not immune to that one.
You might just need the right people leaning on them, pointing them in the right direction.
All this stuff about the photographs is BS. The photos prove nothing. Nothing.
The sheriff, for example, he might just need to ferment some of that racial antipathy.
Make no mistake, we are at war.
Make some suggestions, especially within the political climate of the area.
John Perano understands his people. He never misses an opportunity to press his case.
He's a politician, that one. Do believe it was mentioned that he had been elected 7 times, and his father was sheriff before him.
I've been elected sheriff of Heinzman County for 7 consecutive terms.
So he knows what to run on.
Yes, and coming back to his interviews, he doesn't appear to be outwardly racist, at least to say Gus Greer.
The Mexican, the Cholo, La Raza. They glorify death because they have nothing else to look forward to.
When the official story is being questioned, he appears to panic, as if he is afraid.
Doesn't matter. The photos are not evidence.
Perhaps it's not due to people discovering his actions were motivated by racism, but rather people questioning the narrative. They might uncover something a bit darker, our little conspiracy which people would rather remain hidden and out of sight.
People tell me not to ask questions and keep quiet. And then I think, are they lying to me? Are they trying to make me feel this is the way it happened, just to make me be quiet and not question? We've lived in this town forever. Would they be lying to me?
And that's only conjecture, mate. Someone could still be leaning on him in just the same way to keep him in line. If he knows what's good for him, he won't be saying anything, and he'll do what he's told.
I know many kids right here in Heinzman who could Photoshop you.
He doesn't need to be part of the conspiracy to act in a way which benefits the people who are orchestrating the conspiracy and cover-up.
I wouldn't expect Barry to know it, but you might have noticed that the judge closed the hearing to the public.
Judge Jack Hudson has instituted a full media ban with no cameras permitted in the courtroom and no media personnel allowed within 200 yards of the courthouse.
That's an exception to the Sixth Amendment, which, among other things, secures the right to a speedy and public trial. The judge closed the hearing. He didn't allow the public in, and that probably includes reporters. That's not usually done unless, in the case of public safety, the safety of a witness testifying, even the graphic nature of the evidence that would be provided.
How do you run DNA tests on 20 square blocks of bloody sand?
Really, that behavior is a constitutional violation. I just assumed it was something which could be done, part of the greater conspiracy to control information. And I think the motivation would be public safety, and no doubt there are graphic details in the evidence provided.
It's not exactly a common practice, but it does happen in extreme circumstances. The judge had to consider alternatives to closing the court to the public. It would be another thing which could be grounds for an appeal of the verdict. I didn't expect Barry to know.
Oh, that's enough out of the both of you. I know me rights are secured in that little constitution. You got to know some of it for the bloody test.
Barry's recent history aside, as you can see, there's very apparent support for this greater conspiracy within the film. The way that the court handled Salazar's case is just part of that.
Because the less people who know about the evidence provided, the less scrutiny of their evidence.
Before you can answer any of that, you're going to let that one go, or we're going to be hearing nothing but this all night, and I got to put a stop to that.
Yeah, but, I mean, after all that, what's even left to talk about?
Dear God, the ending.
What?
Finally.
You ready for this to be over already? You so eager. You got holiday coming up.
The ending is what matters. Some might even say that it's the most important thing. Not the journey, but how the journey ends. And this little journey of ours is thankfully coming to an end.
He could be right about that. Getting the ending right to a story is really important. A bad ending can ruin a perfectly good story. Game of Thrones. Say what you will about the HBO series, but I was pretty invested in it, and that last season, that really ruined everything. That journey, if that's what you want to call it, it was ruined for me.
Not exactly a contentious opinion, is it? Dear me, a retrospective coin away. Looking back on everything you watched, that sense that the experience was squandered, maybe left you feeling a bit hollow and empty.
You don't have to twist the knife like that. You know I had hope.
At least he didn't give you that hope. And while I'm at it, here's hoping the old man finishes the books.
Well, let me surprise you with this one. I won't be singing the praises for the ending of Horror in the High Desert. Not exactly.
Actually, I am a little shocked to hear you agree. Maybe I did have more to drink than I thought.
Oh my, you were pissed.
I mean, it is really boring. If you did try to defend it, I would think there is some ulterior motive involved.
Hey guys, a little video update.
You mean like the way I got the both of you to watch these with me? I guess so.
No one is surprised by the way you enjoy suffering. What I am surprised by is how bad the ending was.
The clips begin like all the other clips. Gary's even smiling.
I wasn't surprised that it was bad, but how bad? It was almost incredible to see how they fumbled that last 15 or so minutes of the movie.
Wait, you think the finale is 15 minutes?
I thought the ending was a lifetime in length, like a man could have been born, lived and died within the time I sat watching a man grope around the empty wilderness, alone, in the dark, with a camera set to night vision. I'll say it once more. Somehow, the Blair Witch Project was better.
You're not wrong. It is much better than this. For what I remember, it was...
Where is he? Where are you?
higher energy. There were more people. They were confined to a single location, and it just had something happening.
I do agree the ending of the Blair Witch Project is better. What I meant was that the entire film is better than Horror in the High Desert. The ending to The Horror in the High Desert is exactly as bad as how the people described, at least the ones unfavorable to the movie, described the events in summary of the Blair Witch Project. But it's worse. It is simply a man wandering around what I assume is supposed to be the wilderness. And for an extended period of time, it's dark. There isn't any conversation. It's just him alone in the quiet stillness of a dark night. And as he searches for something, it is incredibly boring, and you may have fallen asleep. I was, by the time we finished, both bored and drunk enough to find the way the world was spinning to be far, far more interesting, and a more worthwhile investment of my time.
You were pissed when we got there, but that bottle was gone by the time the credits
And
rolled.
with good reason. I needed it.
I reckon they were trying for tense, that kind of oppressive atmospheric horror. I can imagine they probably thought the scene, well, I'm sure they had it a bit more tense and thrilling in their head.
They can imagine whatever they want. It was still a letdown. It's a good 10 minutes of wandering through the woods with nothing happening in the dark. We already know, or we think we know, what Gary's ultimate fate is. We're just waiting for something, anything to happen. We know that this is how Gary dies, so there's no tension in the scene. He's just wandering slowly in the dark, wandering towards his inevitable fate. We just don't know exactly what happens. And when it does happen...
You say that, but I do kinda like the way it's revealed. The visual of him looking at the cabin for that extended period of time. And then... whatever it was or is, all he's looking at it. We don't exactly realize that he's been staring at this thing, this creature, for a while, and we realize that it's been watching him for as long as he's been staring at the cabin. I like that moment. It's a good moment. I don't know if it's exciting, but I did tense up. It was thrilling, even scary for that moment. It's not exactly a jump scare. It's not something suddenly appears screaming at you. It's something we're staring at for a little bit. And then it moves, making you realize, fuck me dead. That's not a thing, it's a thing.
That might be true, but one moment in an extended sequence of nothing does not make that sequence worthwhile. I may have seen it, I may not have, but even after it's revealed, it's hardly worth it. Gary scampers off, afraid, while he's trying to hide in the dark. It eventually finds him. That singular thrill is forgotten before the film is even over. Gary hiding alone in the dark. That is boring. There is little to be seen in the dark wilderness. There is only the night vision, the handheld video camera, through which we view the events.
If they had something more in their heads, maybe a tense slasher movie-esque scene with the lone survivor attempting to elude the killer, getting from one hiding place to the next, trying desperately not to scream, to remain silent as this menacing figure stalks after them. But this comes off like an afterthought, like they realized they were short and someone was demanding more. The whole movie was stripped down in the way of production. They probably couldn't film something more exciting. They just had one of their actors go walk around the forest for a bit while holding a camera.
One of the times that my whole low-budget thing goes wrong. Both of these movies took my ideas on low budget to the extreme. One of them, at least, managed to make more effective use of it than the other.
And while we did focus so heavily on Gary forming your vaunted emotional connection, that connection investment is ruined by those ideas discussed previously. Like JD said, we already know by then that Gary dies, so we already know his fate. There's nothing uncertain about it, so we don't need to uncover more. And since it's so dull, as he's wandering through the darkness alone, we just want to get it over with. It's perfunctory. We're going through the motions. We don't even want to see how it ends. We just want it to end.
You even remember any of that? Seriously, you fell off the couch at one point. You were just staring at the tally from the floor.
It was more comfortable on the floor at that point.
At least Gary didn't take Tuca with him.
I first knew something was off when he asked me to watch his dog Tuca before he went out on one of his trips.
And thankfully, that tragic misfortune was avoided. That would have been more interesting, more money, and probably would have resulted in making people, myself included, quite angry. Because a monster would have gone away with hurting him, but not an adorable canine companion that did nothing wrong. But we're not going to talk about the one way in which the movie avoided a failing, because we can talk about how Savageland did their ending so much better, and in the same manner of recovered or found footage.
You know what made my morning? Hearing that some group of unknown patriots found where Salazar's grave was and dug it up.
Fuck me, dad me. It was short, sweet, and to the point. Not much pessing about with that one. It did it right.
7 weeks after Salazar's execution, the mutilated remains of 2 campers were found in the Tonto National Forest, 115 miles north of Sangre de Cristo.
Yeah, but the footage was... I mean, the ending wasn't bad, but the footage itself, like the actual recording, it was just... I couldn't even tell what was happening.
Yeah, mate, the footage was distorted, staticky video, distorted audio, barely see what's going on. Still exciting in a kind of way.
Most of all, it confirms that the undead threat that was established in the movie is credible, and not just a product of a crazed conspiracy, unless it's a bluff of a kind. But before we lead into the recovered footage, the documentary portion ends with the ominous warning of these attacks moving north, heading further into the United States, and that they're going to keep happening.
The same patterns emerging east to Juarez. Up into New Mexico and Alamogordo, 3 dead, 9 unaccounted.
The Gus Greer show confirms that Salazar was executed, his body buried, and then speculates over the motives of why the grave was disturbed and the body is now missing.
The body's gone, my friends, and good riddance.
It seems after his death, Salazar joined the ranks of the undead, possibly infected during the event.
Francisco has bite marks. They match the victims. How can you botch that?
Somehow or another, the infection didn't kill him outright, but he still carried it till he expired. That part isn't uncommon in some media. Some media you can die by normal, mundane means, not being vegan, and still reanimate after death, due to whatever the strain of infection, which just exists in the environment for whatever reason. A bite kills you in that scenario.
Oh, look, mate, we're not going to do this now. You ain't going to go on another one of your zombie toy raids. We're not doing it. Salazar is confirmed to be executed, and in the recovered footage from a small campsite in the Arizona wilderness, we can see that he's been reanimated, one of the mindless undead, and some people are attacked. It's a pretty good affair.
At least it's short. I don't enjoy all the distortions they added into the footage because, well, it's tough to say. But it's short, and since you can't see much, it might look more realistic, I guess. Footage that's been damaged, they don't need a lot of makeup or to do much to make the actors look convincing.
It works, and that's what matters. Not only because it's short, but because it's set up. We know that Salazar was bedridden and had been recovering. We can wonder about if the bite related to his mental state. You might even forget during the journey that Salazar would return as the undead. Olivares has been talking about the threat, that people don't want to talk about it.
Except they got it all wrong. This doesn't end with the execution of Francisco Salazar.
That it doesn't just stop at Sangre de Cristo, and that it's headed north. That Arizona is the missing persons capital of the United States. That there's strange, unexplainable things happening out in the desert. And it doesn't outstay its welcome. It is brief. It doesn't last long enough for the damaged film to become a burden, an annoyance. Truly, brevity works in its favor.
If only you could learn the same lesson.
I'll work on it.
Best not to dwell on it. That might be everything needed to be said.
I'm so happy it's over.
Yeah, always going off about that. You just tell me if you got any thoughts.
This just in. Drunken man causes disturbance at a local movie theater. Says he was dissatisfied with the movie shown tonight. See more of the shocking details at 11.
Good one, mate. Seriously though, you got nothing to say. I know what this hoon is gonna start spouting off.
I don't know. I'm not as positive as you are about these films, but there's just not a lot to hold me. Kind of feels like after we're done that they're just...
There's nothing to grip you. I think that it lacks story in a sense, a plot, a narrative. They don't exactly have a journey for the audience to experience. I'm aware that Barry has a fondness for these movies, and I take umbrage with that. I said I had a preference for one over the other, that I found it interesting. I feel that there's a fundamental problem with this kind of subgenre, this documentary style. The lack of story, it doesn't pull the audience in. It's more of a statement. It's a matter of fact. They're detailing, chronicling a series of events, a short summary of what happened. It's truly representative of a fundamental in storytelling. Show, don't tell. They are not showing us a story. They are telling us a story, and I fear the separation from the events might create a distance between the audience and the film. This disconnection might engender dissatisfaction or a lack of concern or care.
If you say so, I think they're okay movies. Horror in the High Desert is a little bland, and it didn't resonate with me. It might come down to me being disinterested in the fate of Gary Hinge. Too much hinges on that. It really does hinge on establishing that empathetic reaction.
Kind of getting creeped out, but not as much as I was last time yet.
Being able to relate to Gary, and I couldn't do that. Maybe if they could have gotten a more charismatic character, maybe then it could have succeeded. But it just doesn't. Not like I felt from Savageland. Savageland did hold my attention. I thought it was interesting all the way through. Even if I knew it was going to end with the death of Salazar, I wanted to see what was going to happen. I wanted to learn more about the events of the small town, and overall, I'd say that Horror in the High Desert was a 5, and that Savagelands was a 7.
5. A 7. What are you rating these movies out of? What is the scale? 100? I'd say that's going too far. What, a 15? Maybe a 20-point scale? What? How did you score any of that?
What the fuck? Marcus, what the hell, man? I'm just giving them a score. What's the big deal?
The deal? The deal is that I'm not going to let you sit here and try to convince the
Calm
audience.
down, mate. That's enough out of you. You're getting a little out of hand. You're going too far with that one. Just stop it.
But
he can score it any way he wants.
Yes.
Those are his thoughts.
Forgive me. JD, I appreciate the points you have highlighted. I believe you're far too generous towards these films, or that you're not making full use of the numbers provided. I am lukewarm on these films. I don't hate them. They just don't have the necessary components of a narrative to make me invested. I wouldn't watch either of them again, but I do find myself thinking more positively on Savagelands. The circumstances surrounding the events of Sangre de Cristo are interesting enough. The commentary is intriguing, but there still isn't much else.
And what? You just hate ratings?
Don't worry about him. His father was assaulted by a local film critic when he was a boy.
Don't be facetious. I have legitimate complaints about how people rate media, that they don't make full use of all the numbers provided and inflate scores.
There you are, mate. You're crazy, bogging comment down. Look, I'll admit that while I enjoyed both, and I did, don't take what I'm saying as a slight. I didn't enjoy Horror in the High Desert as much as I did Savagelands. Savagelands was just the more compelling film. His production was a bit more tight, a bit more value seemed like it had been spent on the whole production. I do agree that Horror in the High Desert seemed a bit more value, Brian, a little cheaper. And I'm not really saying it's bad, but it could be a detriment to your experience. As for either of them, I'm aware as dealing with the both of you that I might have a bias. I enjoyed them, and I'm aware that not everyone will. So while I'm iffy on recommending Savagelands, I know I wouldn't be able to do the same for Horror in the High Desert. Not to anyone but genre enthusiasts, people like me who enjoy the found footage. So if you do like that kind of thing, give them a watch. And if you're not, fuck mate, dead mate. You don't want to open that bag of cards. Maybe Savagelands, not Horror in the High Desert.
And I will continue to struggle to call these horror films. Neither film was scary, and really, that's the worst part of it. The documentary elements, the distance, I'm not sure that it can overcome the fact that it's relating these events to the audience. They're not even horror movies to me.
Are these films supposed to be scary? I mean, yeah, I guess, but you know, you can't recommend Horror in the High Desert just by the ending alone. That ending it's just awful.
Bloody oath, mate. That's a misstep. And a big reason as to why I can't recommend it to anyone besides a genre enthusiast. I not only enjoyed it, but I'm a simple mind. Unlike that fucker.
They're bad movies. Nothing else needs to be said.
Yeah, mate, heard it all before. We'll find something for you one day.
Yeah, but seriously, what's with you and that whole ratings?